I came home early for Christmas. The house was empty. Only my daughter-in-law's wheelchair-bound stepfather sat in the living room with a note on him. "We're traveling to Italy. Take care of him and don't bother us." The old man turned to me and said, "Shall we begin?" I nodded. For days later, my daughter-in-law was begging for, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I pulled into the driveway of my son Marcus' house at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on December 23rd, earlier than expected. The Christmas decorations hung perfectly from the eaves, twinkling lights casting warm shadows across the manicured lawn. Everything looked picture perfect, just like Ka always insisted it should be. My daughter-in-law had very specific ideas about how things should appear. I grabbed my overnight bag from the passenger seat, already imagining the chaos inside. Marcus would probably be assembling some last-minute toy while Ka directed traffic from the kitchen, orchestrating Christmas dinner with military precision. At 67, I'd learned to appreciate these family gatherings, even when they came with Kaya's particular brand of stress. The front door was unlocked, which struck me acid. Ka was obsessive about security, always checking locks twice and setting the alarm, even for short trips to the grocery store. I pushed it open and called out, "Hello, I'm here early." Silence. The house felt different, empty in a way that made my skin prickle with unease. The Christmas tree stood in the corner of the living room, presents neatly arranged beneath it, but no one was rushing to greet me. No sounds of family life, no television playing, no footsteps upstairs. Marcus, Ka, still nothing. I set my bag down and walked deeper into the house. My footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The kitchen was spotless, not a dish out of place. No signs of Christmas dinner preparation, no cookie sheets cooling on the counter. It was as if the family had simply vanished. That's when I saw him. Harold sat in his wheelchair in the living room, positioned near the window, where the afternoon light cast long shadows across his weathered face. He was Ka's stepfather, a man I'd met only twice in the 5 years since Marcus married my daughter-in-law. Both times he'd been quiet, almost invisible in the corner, while Ka fussed around him with an air of barely concealed irritation. A folded piece of paper was taped to his wheelchair armrest. Harold looked up at me with eyes that were far more alert than I remembered. There was something in his expression, not confusion or helplessness, but a kind of grim determination that made me pause. "Hello, Clarice," he said, his voice clearer and stronger than I'd ever heard it. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." I approached slowly, my heart beginning to race for reasons I couldn't name. "Harold, where is everyone? Where are Marcus and Ka?" He gestured toward the note with one gnarled finger. "Read it." My hands trembled slightly as I peeled the paper from his armrest. The handwriting was Ka's, neat and precise as always. "Clarice, we decided to take a last-minute trip to Italy for Christmas. Harold needs looking after. Don't let him bother you too much. Just make sure he takes his pills and doesn't fall. We'll be back after New Year's. Ka." I stared at the note, reading it twice, then 3 times. Each word felt like a small slap. No explanation, no apology for the sudden change of plans. No acknowledgement that I'd driven 3 hours to spend Christmas with my family. Just a set of instructions for babysitting an old man they'd left behind like an unwanted piece of furniture. "They left you here," I said, the words coming out as a statement rather than a question. Harold's laugh was dry and humorless. "Oh, they left me here. All right, but not the way you think." Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. His shoulders weren't as hunched as I remembered. His hands resting on the wheelchair arms didn't shake. Even his eyes seemed different, sharper, more focused. "I don't understand." Harold leaned forward slightly. And for the first time since I'd known him, he looked directly at me instead of staring at some point past my shoulder. "Tell me, Clarice, in all the times you visited this house, has Ka ever spoken to me like I was actually in the room?" The question caught me off guard. I thought back to family dinners, holiday gatherings, brief visits over the years. Ka would move around Harold like he was a piece of furniture, adjusting his blanket without asking if he was cold, changing the television channel without checking what he was watching, talking about him to others as if he couldn't hear every word. "She talks about you," I said carefully. "About me?" "Yes, but Tom." Harold shook his head. "In 5 years of living in this house, your daughter-in-law has spoken directly to Tom maybe a dozen times, and most of those were orders." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Harold, what's going on?" He glanced toward the window, then back at me. They think I don't understand things anymore. They think this old brain is too foggy to notice when I'm being discussed like a problem that needs solving. What kind of problem? Harold was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming silently on the wheelchair arm. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but every word was crystal clear. The kind of problem that costs money to maintain and might live longer than convenient. The coldness and mistamok spread upward, reaching my chest. What are you saying? I'm saying, Clarice, that your son and his wife didn't go to Italy for a romantic Christmas getaway. Harold's eyes met mine, and I saw something there that made my breath catch. They went to Italy because they needed me to be alone in this house for a very specific reason. What reason? Harold reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out a small recording device, the kind I'd seen in electronic stores, but never thought much about. He held it up so I could see the tiny red light blinking. They needed me to be alone so that what they'd been planning couldn't be traced back to them when it happened. My mouth went dry. Harold, you're scaring me. Good, he said, clicking off the recorder. Because I've been scared for months, but I'm not scared anymore. He looked at me with eyes that held no trace of confusion or frailty because now I have a witness. The afternoon light was fading outside, casting longer shadows across the room. The house felt too quiet, too empty, like it was holding its breath. We should talk, Harold said, his voice steady and determined. About what your daughter-in-law has been telling everyone about me, about what she's been planning. About why she made sure I'd be alone in this house for 10 days. He paused, and when he spoke again, his words sent ice through my veins. And about why she was so confident that by the time they came back, there wouldn't be anyone left to tell the truth about what really happened here. I spent the next hour listening to Harold tell me things that made my blood run cold. We sat in the kitchen while he made us tea. Something that immediately struck me as odd since I'd only ever seen Ka serving him, never the other way around. She tells people I can't be trusted with hot liquids, Harold said, noting my surprise as he poured steaming water into 2 mugs. Says I might burn myself or spill and create a mess. But watch this. His hands were perfectly steady as he carried both mugs to the table. No tremor, no uncertainty. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd been making tea for decades, which of course they had. Harold, I said carefully. Help me understand what's happening here. Has it down across from me, his posture straight and alert. Nothing like the frail, confused man I thought I knew. What's happening is that I've been playing a role for the past 2 years. The role of a declining old man who needs constant supervision and can't be trusted to make his own decisions. Why would you do that? Harold's smile was grim. Because it was the only way to stay alive in this house. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean stay alive? I mean that in the spring of 2022, I started noticing things. Small things at first. My prescription bottles being moved. Pills missing from the weekly organizer Kaya filled for me. Strange charges on my bank statements that I didn't remember authorizing. He pulled out a manila folder from beneath his wheelchair cushion. Another surprise. Since I'd never seen him with personal documents before, I started keeping track, he continued. Opening the folder, every pill count, every bank statement. Every conversation where I pretended to be more confused than I was. The folder contained pages of handwritten notes, bank statements with highlighted entries, photos of pill bottles, and what looked like printed emails. Harold's handwriting was neat and precise, nothing like the shaky scroll I would have expected from someone with dementia. Harold, this as I stared at the documentation, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. How long have you been pretending? 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. He said without hesitation, since the morning I overheard Kaya on the phone with someone discussing how much longer I was likely to live and whether my social security payments would continue if I had to be moved to a facility for safety. Reasons. My hand shook as I reached for the toga. She was talking about putting you in a nursing home. Not just any nursing home. A specific one that she'd already visited. A place where they specialize in patients with advanced dementia who can't advocate for themselves. Harold's voice remained steady, but his eyes hardened. She'd already filled out the preliminary paperwork. He showed me a photocopy of documents with Kaya's signature, describing Harold as having severe cognitive decline, episodes of aggression, and being a danger to himself and others. The description bore no resemblance to the articulate man sitting across from me. But Harold, your own daughter signed these papers. Doesn't she know you're not? Ka isn't my daughter, Harold said quietly. She's my late wife's daughter from a previous marriage. I helped raise her from age 12. Paid for her college. Walked her down the aisle when she married your son. But legally, I'm not her family. I'm just the old man who inherited her mother's house when Helen died. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. The house. She wants the house. The house, my savings account, my social security payments, everything. Harold turned to a page in the folder showing bank records. In the past 2 years, she's managed to get herself added as a joint account holder on my checking account. She told the bank I was becoming forgetful and needed help managing my finances. I studied the statements. Hundreds of dollars in withdrawals I was certain Harold hadn't made. Regular transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Why didn't you stop her? Report it. Harold's slaw was bitter. To whom? The bank sees an elderly man with a devoted stepdaughter helping manage his affairs. The doctor sees cognitive decline because Ka accompanies me to every appointment and describes symptoms I supposedly exhibit at home. Even your son believes I'm losing my faculties because that's what his wife tells him. Marcus knows about this. Marcus knows what Ka tells him. That I get confused and agitated. That I forget to take my medication. That I sometimes don't recognize people or remember recent conversations. Harold leaned forward. She's very convincing. Your daughter-in-law. She has a gift for making people see what she wants them to see. I thought about every interaction I'd witnessed between Ka and Harold. Her patient sighs when he asked questions, her gentle but firm redirections when he tried to speak. Her explanations to others about his condition while he sat right there seemingly lost in his own world. But you've been aware this whole time. Every single moment. Every condescending pat on the head. Every conversation about me like I wasn't in the room. Every pill she substituted or skipped to make me actually drowsy and confused. Harold's voice remained controlled, but I could see the anger burning beneath the surface. Do you know what it's like to watch someone slowly steal your life while everyone around you believes you're too far gone to notice? The question hung in the air between us. I had no answer because I couldn't imagine anything more terrifying. The medication, I said. You said she was changing your medication. Harold nodded. She convinced my doctor that I was having trouble sleeping, so he prescribed something to help. What she didn't tell him was that she was giving me double doses plus an over-the-counter sleep aid. Just enough to keep me foggy and compliant, but not enough to be obviously dangerous. That SI couldn't finish the sentence. Attempted murder, abuse of an elderly person, fraud. Harold shrugged. Take your pick. The beauty of her plan is that everything appears accidental or well-intentioned. A caring stepdaughter trying to help a declining elderly man. He pulled out another document, a letter from the nursing facility. This came last week while Kaya thought I was napping. Confirming my admission date for January 15th, just 3 weeks away. I stared at the admission letter, my hands trembling. Harold, we have to call someone. The police, Adult Protective Services, and tell them what? That a woman who's been documented as my primary caregiver for 2 years, who has power of attorney papers and medical records supporting her claims, is actually trying to harm. Harold shook his head. They'll see an elderly man making accusations against his devoted stepdaughter. They'll assume it's paranoid delusions brought on by dementia. But you have evidence. I have evidence that I've been collecting while pretending to be mentally incompetent. Evidence that I obtained by deceiving medical professionals and financial institutions about my cognitive state. Harold's smile was sardonic. Not exactly the most credible witness. The kitchen had grown dark while we talked, the winter afternoon fading into evening. Harold reached over and turned on the overhead light, and in the sudden brightness, I saw him clearly for the first time. Not the frail, confused man I'd thought I knew, but someone sharp and determined and very much in control of his faculties. So what's the plan? I asked. Why did you want me to find you here? What do you need me to do? Harold's eyes met mine, and I saw something there that made my pulse quicken. I need you to help me disappear, Clarice, before January 15th arrives, and they make me disappear permanently. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The house felt too quiet, too isolated. And somewhere in Italy, my son and his wife were probably enjoying wine and pasta, believing they'd left behind an old man who would quietly slip away while they weren't looking. There's something else, Harold said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Something I haven't told you yet about why they chose this particular week to leave town. He reached for another folder, this one thicker than the first. Something about what they're expecting to find when they come home. Harold opened the second folder, and what I saw inside made my breath catch in my throat. Photographs, documents, and what appeared to be a detailed timeline spanning several months. But it was the top document that made my hands shake. A copy of Harold's own death certificate dated 3 days from now, December 26th. Harold, what is this? It's what they were expecting to find when they returned from Italy, he said, his voice eerily calm. A tragedy that occurred while they were away. An elderly man with dementia who forgot to take his heart medication, wandered outside in the cold, and suffered a fatal cardiac episode. I stared at the forged document, my mind reeling. But this is premeditated murder. Yes, it is. Harold turned the page to reveal a detailed floor plan of the house with handwritten notes. They've been planning this for months. The trip to Italy isn't a vacation, Clarice. It's an alibi. My tea had gone cold, but I couldn't have swallowed it anyway. My throat felt like it was closing. How do you know all this? Harold's expression grew darker because I've been documenting everything. Every whispered phone call, every private conversation they thought I couldn't hear or understand. He pulled out a small recording device, different from the one I'd seen earlier. This isn't the only one. I have 6 of these hidden throughout the house. You've been recording them for 8 months. Ever since I overheard Kaya telling someone that Christmas would be the perfect time because the house would be empty except for the old man, and if something happened, it would look completely natural. Harold showed me transcripts of conversations that made my blood run cold. Ka discussing Harold's medication schedule with someone, noting which pills were essential and which could be forgotten. Marcus talking about insurance policies and inheritance paperwork. Both of them discussing the timeline for the nursing home admission and why it needed to happen quickly. But the death certificate, I said, my voice barely a whisper. How did they get that? Ka has a friend who works in medical records at the county hospital. Someone who's helped her before with documentation for the nursing home paperwork. Harold's smile was grim. They've been very thorough in their planning. I felt sick. Actually, physically sick. Harold, we have to call the police right now. This is conspiracy to commit murder. No, Harold said firmly. We can't call the police yet. What do you mean we can't? This is evidence obtained illegally by someone who's been lying about his mental capacity for 2 years. Harold leaned forward, his eyes intense. Think about it, Clarice. How do I explain that I've been secretly recording conversations while pretending to have dementia? How do I prove that I'm mentally competent when I have medical records stating the opposite? The reality of the situation began to sink in. Harold had been so focused on gathering evidence that he'd trapped himself in his own deception. There's something else, Harold continued. Something I discovered last week that changes everything. He turned to another section of the folder, revealing bank statements and legal documents I didn't recognize. I'm not just Harold Garrett, confused stepfather living on Social Security. He looked at me with eyes that held secrets I was only beginning to understand. I'm Harold Garrett, retired private investigator with 42 years of experience in fraud detection and surveillance. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Everything I thought I knew about this quiet, frail man evaporated in an instant. You're a private investigator? I retired when I married Helen 15 years ago. But I never lost the skills. Harold's posture straightened even further, and suddenly I could see the sharp analytical mind that had been hidden beneath the facade of confusion. When I started noticing discrepancies in my bank account, my first instinct was to investigate. Old habits, but the wheelchair, the confusion, the medication, all real. Initially, I did have a minor stroke 2 years ago. Nothing major, but enough to slow me down and make me genuinely need some assistance for a few months. Harold stood up from his wheelchair, moving with only a slight stiffness. But I recovered much better than anyone expected. I just chose not to let them know that. I watched in amazement as Harold walked to the kitchen counter, his movements careful but steady. You can walk. I can walk, drive, think, and remember everything perfectly well. The wheelchair is a prop. The confusion is an act. Even the medication muddle is deliberate. I've been disposing of the pills she gives me and taking the correct doses when she's not around. My God, Harold, how long have you been planning this? Since the moment I realized they were planning to kill me. Harold returned to his chair. Not the wheelchair, I noticed, but a regular kitchen chair. I knew I needed irrefutable evidence, and I knew I needed someone else to witness it. Someone they trusted, someone who couldn't be dismissed as a confused old man making accusations. That's why you wanted me here. That's why I made sure you'd be here. I've been subtly encouraging Marcus to invite you for Christmas for months. Every conversation I'd mention how nice it would be to have family around for the holidays. The manipulation was stunning in its complexity. Harold had orchestrated not just his own deception, but mine as well. What about the trip to Italy? Did you know they were planning that? Harold nodded. I encouraged that, too. I overheard Kaya telling Marcus that Christmas would be stressful with everyone around, that maybe they should consider taking a trip instead. I made sure to seem enthusiastic about the idea when Marcus mentioned it. Told him I'd be fine on my own. But you knew you wouldn't be on your own. You knew I was coming. I knew you'd be here. What I didn't know was whether you'd believe me when I told you the truth. Harold's eyes searched my face. Do you believe me, Clarice? I looked at this man I'd thought I knew. This supposed invalid who turned out to be a retired investigator who'd been running an elaborate counterintelligence operation from his wheelchair. The evidence was overwhelming, but more than that, everything finally made sense. The odd moments I'd noticed over the years, the times when Harold seemed more aware than he should be. The subtle inconsistencies in Ka's stories about his condition. I believe you, I said. But Harold, what's the endgame here? What are we going to do? Harold smiled. And for the first time since I'd known him, it was a smile with teeth. We're going to give them exactly what they want, Clarice. We're going to let them come home and find Harold Garrett dead. What? We're going to stage my death exactly as they planned it. We're going to let them believe their plan worked perfectly. Harold leaned back in his chair, looking more confident than I'd ever seen him. And then, when they're celebrating their success, when they've incriminated themselves beyond any doubt, we're going to bring Harold Garrett back from the dead. That's insane. That's justice. Harold's voice hardened. They want to murder an old man for his money and get away with it. Instead, they're going token-fest to murdering an old man while he records every word. Outside, snow had begun to fall, dusting the windows with white. The house felt like a stage set, waiting for the final act of a play that had been in rehearsing for months. There's just one problem, Harold said, his expression growing serious again. We only have 3 days to pull this off. And if we make even one mistake, if they suspect anything is wrong, I really will end up dead. He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was strong and steady, nothing like the frail grasp I remembered. Are you with him, Clarice? Because once we start this, there's no going back. I looked into the eyes of a man who'd spent 2 years pretending to lose his mind in order to save his life. A man who turned himself into the perfect victim in order to catch his would-be killers. What do you need me to do? The next 24 hours passed like a masterclass in deception with Harold as my teacher. I'd never imagined that a 67-year-old woman could become an accomplice to such an elaborate scheme. But watching Harold work was like seeing a different person entirely. The key to a successful operation, Harold explained as we sat in his bedroom the next morning, is making sure every detail matches what they expect to find. They've planned this death scenario very carefully, so we need to follow their script exactly. He showed me a notebook filled with observations he'd made about Ka and Marcus' conversations over the past months. Every detail of their plan was documented in Harold's precise handwriting. According to what I've overheard, they expect to find me in the backyard. The story will be that I became confused during the night, forgot where I was, and wandered outside in my pajamas looking for Helen. Harold's voice remained steady as he discussed his own fictional demise. The cold and stress triggered a heart attack. But Harold, you don't have heart problems. Actually, I do. Mild coronary artery disease. Nothing serious with proper medication, but it's documented in my medical records, which Kaya has access to. Harold pulled out another folder. She's been very careful to ensure that my death will be completely believable from a medical standpoint. I studied the medical records he showed me. Sure enough, there were notations about heart irregularities, medications for blood pressure, warnings about stress and overexertion. Everything needed to support the narrative of an elderly man with cardiac issues succumbing to exposure and panic. They've thought of everything, I murmured. They've thought of almost everything, Harold corrected. But they made one critical error. They assumed I was too far gone to notice what they were planning. Over the course of that day, Harold walked me through every aspect of what we needed to do. The timing had to be precise. The physical evidence had to be perfect. And most importantly, we needed to make sure that when Marcus and Ka returned, they would incriminate themselves completely before discovering that Harold was still alive. The recording equipment is the most crucial part, Harold explained, showing me tiny devices he'd hidden throughout the house. I have microphones in the living room, kitchen, their bedroom, and the study where they keep their financial documents. Everything they say will be captured. What if they don't say anything incriminating? Harold's smile was confident. Trust me, they will. I've studied them for 2 years. Marcus can't keep a secret. And Ka can't resist gloating when she thinks one. The moment they believe I'm dead, they'll start discussing how perfectly their plan worked. We spent hours going over the details. Harold showed me where he'd hidden a change of clothes, a prepaid cell phone, and cash in the basement. He prepared a hiding spot in the crawl space beneath the house where he could wait and monitor everything through wireless receivers connected to his recording devices. What about me? I asked. What's my role supposed to be? You're the innocent family member who discovered the tragedy. When Marcus and Ka return, you'll be here devastated by Harold's death, having already called the authorities. Harold handed me a script he'd written. You'll tell them exactly what happened, following the story they've planned. They'll be so relieved that everything went according to their expectations that they won't question any details. The script was brilliant in its simplicity. I would tell them that I'd found Harold's bedroom empty on Christmas morning, discovered the back door open, and found him collapsed in the yard. I'd called 911, but it was too late. The paramedics had pronounced him dead at the scene and the body had been taken to the morgue for a routine examination. But there won't actually be a body at morgue. I pointed out there will be, Harold said. That's the beautiful part of this plan. I have a contact at the funeral home, someone I worked with during my investigation days. He's agreed to help us stage the death officially. As far as the system is concerned, Harold Garrett died of natural causes on December 25. The complexity of Harold's plan was staggering. He'd been preparing for this moment for months, setting up contingencies I couldn't have imagined. Every document, every witness, every official record would support the story of his death. What happens after they confess? I asked. We have enough evidence to put them both in prison for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, elder abuse, and attempted homicide. The recordings will be admissible because they'll be made in their own home where they have no expectation of privacy from me. Harold's eyes hardened. They'll spend the rest of their lives behind bars. That evening, we rehearsed the entire scenario. Harold showed me exactly where his body would be found, how the scene should look, what I should tell the authorities. Every detail had to be perfect because any inconsistency might alert Marcus and Ka that something was wrong. Remember, Harold coached me, you're traumatized. You've just lost a family member in a tragic accident. Don't overact, but make sure they see that you're genuinely upset. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was genuinely upset. Not because Harold was dead, but because my own son had been planning to murder someone for money. The grief I'd need to portray was real, just not for the reasons everyone would assume. There's one more thing, Harold said as we finished our preparations. Something I need you to know before we go through with this. He led me to his bedroom and opened the closet, revealing a wall safe I hadn't noticed before. Inside were stacks of documents, photographs, and what looked like several thousand in cash. I wasn't entirely honest about my financial situation, Harold admitted. I do have Social Security and a small pension, but I also have a considerable amount of money that Ka doesn't know about. The bank statements he showed me made my eyes widen. Harold had accounts containing over $300,000, investments worth even more, and property deeds for rental homes in 2 other states. Harold, you're wealthy, comfortable, he corrected. Helen and I were very careful with money, and my investigative work paid well over the years. Ka knows about the house and my primary checking account, but she has no idea about the rest. Why are you telling me this? Harold's expression grew serious. Because if something goes wrong, if this plan fails and they actually succeed in killing me, I want you to know that there are resources available to make sure they don't get away with it. Everything is documented here, including evidence of their theft from my known accounts. The weight of what we were about to attempt settled over me like a heavy blanket. We were playing a dangerous game with people who had already proven they were willing to commit murder. Are you sure about this, Harold? We could still call the police right now. Show them the evidence you've gathered and watch them walk away on a technicality. Watch them claim that a confused old man misunderstood innocent conversations. Harold shook his head. No, Clarice. They need to be caught in the act. They need to confess to what they've done on tape with witnesses. Closed the safe and turned to face me. Tomorrow night, Harold Garrett dies. And the day after that, when Marcus and Kate return from their celebratory vacation, they're going to learn what it feels like to be hunted. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the backyard where Harold's body would supposedly be found. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the final act of a drama that had been building for years. Get some sleep, Harold advised. Tomorrow is going to be the most important performance of both our lives. As I lay in the guest room that night, staring at the ceiling, I wondered what I'd gotten myself into. In less than 24 hours, I would become an accessory to a fake murder, gambling everything on the hope that we could outsmart two people who had already proven they were capable of anything. But when I thought about the alternative, watching Harold disappear into a nursing home where Ka could slowly finish what she'd started, I knew we had no choice. Tomorrow, we would find out whether a retired private investigator and a grandmother from Ohio could pull off the most elaborate sting operation either of us had ever imagined. December 29th arrived gray and cold, with ice coating the driveway like a warning. I sat in the living room where I'd spent the past 4 days perfecting my role as the grieving family member, surrounded by the props of our elaborate deception. Sympathy cards I'd written myself sat on the coffee table. A funeral home brochure lay open beside them. The house smelled faintly of the casseroles neighbors had supposedly brought over. Every detail had been executed flawlessly. Harold was officially dead according to all records. The funeral home had played their part perfectly. Even the local newspaper had run a small obituary that Harold had written himself weeks earlier. But I was terrified. At 2:15 in the afternoon, I heard the sound I'd been dreading and anticipating for days, a car pulling into the driveway. Through the front window, I watched Marcus and Ka emerge from their rental car. Both of them tanned and relaxed from their Italian vacation. They moved slowly, almost reluctantly, and I realized they were preparing themselves to discover what they believed would be Harold's body. Kaya said something to Marcus that I couldn't hear, and he nodded grimly. They were steeling themselves for the performance of grief they'd need to maintain once other people became involved. I took a shaky breath and opened the front door before they could use their key. Marcus, I said, and the tears that came were completely real. Not for Harold, who was very much alive in his hiding spot beneath the house, but for me, son, who had become someone I no longer recognized. Marcus looked surprised to see me. Mom, what are you doing here? I thought you'd gone home after. He trailed off, clearly unsure how to proceed. They'd expected to find Harold's body, not me. After what happened to Harold? I finished for him, my voice breaking. Oh, Marcus, it was terrible. I'm so sorry you weren't here. Kaya stepped forward, her expression shifting into what I now recognized as practiced concern. What happened? Is Harold okay? The question was perfectly delivered. Worried but not panicked, as if she genuinely didn't know, but feared the worst. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed her myself. He's gone, I whispered, allowing my knees to buckle slightly. Marcus caught my arm and I leaned into him, playing the role of the devastated grandmother. He died on Christmas morning. The silence that followed was exactly what Harold had predicted. I could practically see the wheels turning in their heads as they processed the news. Not grief, relief. Their plan had worked. Oh my God, Marcus said, his voice carefully modulated to sound shocked. What happened? I led them into the living room, gesturing toward the couch where they could sit. Beneath our feet, Harold was listening to every word through the wireless receivers he'd hidden throughout the house. I found him Christmas morning. I began following the script Harold and I had rehearsed. His bedroom was empty, and the back door was standing open. He was in the backyard, just lying there in his pajamas. The paramedics said it was his heart. Ka covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine shock. He went outside. But why would he do that? They think he got confused, maybe thought he heard Helen calling for him. You know how he sometimes got disoriented at night. I watched Ka's face carefully as I spoke, seeing the almost imperceptible relaxation around her eyes. This was exactly the scenario they'd planned. Where is he now? Marcus asked. Peterson Funeral Home. They said it was definitely natural causes. The The cold and stress triggered a massive heart attack. The coroner didn't even require an autopsy since his heart condition was so well documented. Another flash of relief crossed Ka's features. No autopsy meant no chance of discovering evidence that might contradict their story. "I can't believe you weren't here," Marcus said. And I heard what sounded like genuine regret in his voice. For a moment, I almost believed that my son was capable of remorse. Then Ka spoke. "There's nothing we could have done," she said, placing a comforting hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Even if we'd been here, if Harold was determined to go outside, we couldn't have stopped him. You know how strong-willed he could be when he got an idea in his head." The casual way she referred to Harold in the past tense made my skin crawl. There was no shock in her voice, no raw grief, just the careful management of a situation that was unfolding exactly as she'd planned. "Did he suffer?" Marcus asked. And this time I heard something that might have been genuine concern. "The paramedics said it would have been very quick," I assured him. "He probably just felt tired and lay down to rest, the cold would have made him sleepy." Ka nodded sagely. "That's something, at least. He went peacefully." They spent the next hour asking questions about the details of Harold's death, the funeral arrangements, the paperwork that needed to be handled. Every answer I gave seemed to reassure them further that everything had gone according to their plan. But it was when they thought I was in the bathroom that I heard what Harold had been waiting for. "Can you believe how perfectly this worked out?" Ka's voice carried clearly through the house, picked up by the microphones Harold had strategically placed. Even the timing was perfect, Christmas morning when emergency response would be slower. "I still can't believe he actually went outside," Marcus replied. "When you told me about your plan, I thought we'd have to do something more direct. The beauty of psychological manipulation is that you can make people do exactly what you want them to do without ever laying a hand on them." Ka's voice held a note of pride. "I've been conditioning him for months to be confused about Helen, to think he heard her voice. A few extra sleeping pills dissolved in his evening tea, just enough to make him disoriented, and nature took care of the rest." My hands shook as I listened from the hallway. Harold had been right about everything. "What about the will?" Marcus asked. "Are you sure everything is in order?" "I've been Harold's legal representative for 2 years. Everything transfers to me's his next of kin, and then I can distribute it however I see fit." Ka's law was soft and satisfied. "The house alone is worth $400,000, plus his savings, his social security backlog, everything. And no one will question it." "Who would question it? A devoted stepdaughter inheriting from an elderly man with no other family?" Ka's voice moved closer to where I was hiding, and I pressed myself against the wall. "Your mother was the perfect witness, too. Having her discover the body and call the authorities gives us complete credibility." I feel bad about lying to her," Marcus said. And for a moment, I heard a trace of the sun-eyed raised. "She'll never know," Ka assured him. "As far as everyone is concerned, Harold Garrett died of natural causes on Christmas morning while his family was away. Case closed." They continued talking for another few minutes, discussing the funeral arrangements they'd need to make, the insurance claims they'd need to file, the timeline for selling Harold's house, and liquidating his assets. Every word was being recorded by Harold's hidden devices. When I finally returned to the living room, I found them sitting close together on the couch, Marcus' arm around Ka's shoulders. They looked like a couple comforting each other in their grief, but I could see the satisfaction in their eyes. "I should probably head home tomorrow," I said. "Let you two have some privacy to process all this." "Actually," Ka said, "would you mind staying a few more days? I could use help with the funeral arrangements, and Marcus needs to get back to work." You knew Harold better than anyone except me. The request caught me off guard. Harold and I hadn't planned for this possibility. "Of course," I heard myself saying, "whatever you need." But as I looked at my daughter-in-law's smiling face, I realized why she wanted me toasty. She needed me to continue playing the role of the innocent witness, the grieving family member who could vouch for their story if anyone ever asked questions. She had no idea that in 3 days when the funeral was scheduled to take place, Harold Garrett was going to rise from the dead and destroy everything she'd worked for. That evening, as Marcus and Kaya unpacked their suitcases and settled back into their routine, I excused myself early and went to my room. But instead of sleeping, I waited until the house was quiet, then crept down to the basement. "Harold," I whispered into the darkness. "I'm here," came his voice from the crawl space. "Did you get everything?" "Every word." They confessed to everything. The medication, the psychological manipulation, even the insurance fraud they're planning. Perfect. Harold emerged from his hiding spot, moving stiffly after hours in the cramped space. 3 more days, Clarice. 3 more days and we'll have them. As I climbed back up to the guest room, I thought about how completely Kai and Marcus believed they'd gotten away with murder. They were sleeping peacefully in their bed, probably dreaming about the money they thought they'd inherited. But Harold Garrett wasn't done with them yet. Not by a long shot. January tuned arrived with the kind of bitter cold that makes your breath visible and your bones ache. The funeral was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning, and by 9:30, the small chapel at Peterson Funeral Home was filled with people who had come to pay their respects to Harold Garrett. I sat in the front row next to Marcus and Ka, playing my role as the devoted family friend one final time. Ka dabbed at her eyes with a tissue occasionally, a perfect performance of grief for the gathered mourners. Marcus stared straight ahead, his jaw tight with what most people probably interpreted as stoic sorrow, but which I now recognized as barely contained anxiety. They had no idea that Harold was sitting in the back row, disguised with a gray beard and wearing clothes borrowed from his contact at the funeral home. To everyone else, he was just another elderly mourner come to pay his respects. The casket at the front of the chapel was empty, of course. Harold had arranged for a ceremonial service only, with cremation scheduled to take place later. Except there would be no cremation because the guest of honor was very much alive and about to make the most dramatic entrance of his 73 years. Pastor Williams, who had known Harold for decades, spoke movingly about a man he described as kind, gentle, and devoted to his late wife, Helen. He talked about Harold's years of service to the community, his work helping people in need, his quiet dignity in the face of age and illness. If only he knew how accurate that last part was. Harold faced his final years with courage, Pastor Williams continued. Surrounded by family who loved him and cared for his needs with devotion. I felt Ka stiffen slightly beside me, even she had limits to how much hypocrisy she could stomach. When the pastor finished his eulogy, he invited anyone who wanted to share memories to come forward. A few of Harold's old neighbors spoke about his kindness, his willingness to help with yard work or home repairs, even as he aged. Mrs. Peterson from down the street talked about how Harold had shoveled her driveway every winter without being asked. Then Kaya stood up. "I'd like to see something about my stepfather," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the chapel. I watched her walk to the podium. Every inch the grieving daughter. She wore a black dress that was appropriately somber, but still managed to flatter her figure. Her makeup was perfect, except for the faint traces of tears she'd carefully applied. "Harold came into my life when I was 12 years old," she began, her voice soft and filled with what sounded like genuine emotion. "He married my mother when I was just starting to become a teenager, and he never once made me feel like I was anything other than his own daughter." The lies flowed from her lips like honey. She talked about Harold's patience, his wisdom, his unconditional love. She described a man who had supported her through college, walked her down the aisle at her wedding, and welcomed her husband into the family with open arms. In his final years, when age began to take its toll, I was honored to be able to care for him the same way he had cared for me. Kaya's voice broke slightly, and she paused to compose herself. "I know some people thought it was a burden, having an elderly man with dementia living in our home, but Harold was never a burden. He was a blessing." He had to grip the edge of the pew to keep from standing up and screaming the truth. The woman who had slowly poisoned Harold, stolen his money, and planned his murder, was being praised for her devotion and sacrifice. "Harold died peacefully on Christmas morning," Kaya continued. "And while we're heartbroken that he's gone, we take comfort in knowing that he's reunited with my mother, Helen, the love of his life." She dabbed at her eyes one final time and returned to her seat beside Marcus, who squeezed her hand supportively. The mourners murmured their approval of her touching tribute. Pastor Williams was about to conclude the service when a voice from the back of the chapel spoke up. "Excuse me, Pastor Williams. I have something to say." Every head in the chapel turned as Harold stood up, pulling off the fake beard and hat that had disguised him. The gasps were audible as people recognized the supposedly dead man walking slowly down the center aisle. Kaya's face went white as paper. Marcus half rose from his seat, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Neither of them could form words. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harold said, his voice strong and clear. I want to thank you all for coming to my funeral. It's not everyone who gets to hear their own eulogy." The chapel erupted in confused murmurs. Some people laughed nervously, thinking this was some kind of joke or misunderstanding. Others looked around in bewilderment, trying to process what they were seeing. Harold reached the front of the chapel and turned to face the congregation. "I'm sorry for the deception, but it was necessary to expose a terrible crime that was being committed against me." He looked directly at Kaya and Marcus, both of whom were still frozen in shock. "You see, my stepdaughter Ka has been systematically poisoning me, stealing my money, and planning my murder for the past 2 years. She convinced everyone that I was suffering from dementia when I was actually being drugged. She forged medical documents to have me committed to a nursing home against my will, and she orchestrated this entire scenario to make my death look natural, while she and my stepson were conveniently out of the country." The chapel was dead silent now, except for the sound of Ka's labored breathing. "Fortunately," Harold continued, "I'm a retired private investigator, and I've been documenting everything. Every conversation, every forged document, every stolen dollar, and 3 days ago, when they returned from their celebratory vacation to Italy, they confessed to everything, believing I was already dead." Harold pulled out a small recording device and pressed play. Ka's voice filled the chapel, clear and damning. "The beauty of psychological manipulation is that you can make people do exactly what you want them to do without ever laying a hand on them. I've been conditioning him for months to be confused about Helen, to think he heard her voice. A few extra sleeping pills dissolved in his evening tea, just enough to make him disoriented, and nature took care of the rest." The gasps from the congregation were louder this time. Several people stood up, staring at Kaya with horror and disgust. Marcus tried to speak. "This is insane." "Harold, you're clearly confused." "Am I?" Harold interrupted. He gestured toward the back of the chapel where 2 police officers were entering quietly. "Detective Morrison, would you please play the rest of the recording for everyone?" Detective Morrison, a tall woman with graying hair who had clearly been coordinating with Harold, took the recording device and continued playing the conversation. Marcus' voice joined Edka's. "What about the will? Are you sure everything is in order? I've been Harold's legal representative for 2 years. Everything transfers to me as his next of kin, and then I can distribute it however I see fit. The house alone is worth $400,000. Plus his savings, his Social Security backlog. Everything," the recording continued, capturing every damning detail of their conversation. By the time it finished, several people in the congregation were crying. Not from grief, but from anger and shock. Caffeinally found her voice. "This is a setup. He's been pretending to be dead, manipulating all of us." "Yes, I have been pretending," Harold agreed. "Just like it pretended to have dementia for 2 years while you slowly tried to murder me. The difference is that my deception was designed to save my life and expose your crimes, your deception was designed to commit murder and theft." Detective Morrison stepped forward. "Kaya Peterson and Marcus Garrett, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, financial fraud, and attempted homicide." The arrest was swift and professional. Kaya struggled and protested her innocence, but Marcus went quietly, his face a mask of defeat. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Kaya turned to look at me with pure hatred. "You knew," she spat. "You were part of this the whole time." I stood up slowly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I knew that you were trying to kill a good man for money, and I knew that I couldn't let that happen. But he's my stepfather. I loved him." "You loved his bank account," I corrected. "Harold is not your stepfather anymore, Ka. He's the man whose life you tried to destroy." As the police led them away, Harold walked over to where I was standing. The other mourners were gradually filing out, some stopping to shake Harold's hand and express their relief that he was alive, others still too stunned to process what they'd witnessed. "It's over," Harold said quietly. "Is it really?" I asked. "Will the charges stick?" "With the recordings, the financial evidence, and the testimony from the funeral home director who helped us stage the death, they'll both be convicted. Ka will probably get 15 to 20 years for attempted murder and elder abuse. Marcus might get a lighter sentence if he cooperates, but he'll still do significant time." We stood together in the empty chapel looking at the casket that had been intended for Harold's fake remains. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. In trying to bury Harold, Ka and Marcus had buried themselves instead. "What happens now?" I asked. Harold smiled. And for the first time since I'd known him, it was a smile of complete peace. Now I get to live the rest of my life on my own terms. No more pretending, no more fear, no more looking over my shoulder. He paused, his expression growing serious. And you, Clarice, get to decide whether you can forgive an old man for involving you in something this dangerous. I thought about everything we'd been through together over the past 2 weeks. The fear, the deception, the moment-by-moment uncertainty of whether our plan would work. I thought about my son sitting in a jail cell, facing the consequences of choices I still couldn't fully understand. But I also thought about Harold, who had spent 2 years of his life pretending to lose his mind in order to stay alive. Who had turned himself into the perfect victim in order to catch his would-be killers. Who had trusted me with his life and his plan for justice. There's nothing to forgive. I told him, you saved your own life. And you probably saved other elderly people from becoming Kaya's victims in the future. 6 months later, I received a letter from Harold. He had moved to Florida where he was enjoying retirement in a small community near the beach. He'd made new friends, taken a painting, and was volunteering with an organization that helped elderly people protect themselves from financial abuse. Ka had been sentenced to 18 years in prison. Marcus received 8 years after cooperating with prosecutors and testifying against his wife. The house had been sold with the proceeds going to various charities that Harold had selected. As for me, I had learned something important about family, loyalty, and the difference between the two. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones who hurt you most, and sometimes the people who truly care about you are the ones you'd never expect. Harold and I still exchange letters regularly. We've become unlikely friends, bonded by the experience of fighting for justice against people who thought they could get away with murder. The last line of his most recent letter made me smile. Thank you for believing in a dead man's story. It made all the difference in helping him come back to life. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment bilo? And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.